Australia, while children were supposed to be in the classroom learning, thousands of high school students skipped school in Melbourne and travelled to the city to march alongside adults and activists in support of Palestine. Some children chanted Allahu Akbar, others chanted anti-Semitic messages. The protest was apparently inspired by the mass school walkouts we've seen in the US and the UK.
This attack was not unprecedented, as Israel has been occupying Palestine for over 70 years. Australian state genocided Indigenous communities. The Indigenous and Palestinian struggle goes hand in hand.
People frame this as a humanitarian crisis. It simply isn't true. This is murder in cold blood.
The organisers of Free Palestine Melbourne encouraged children to miss school and join the rally on social media. And these are the types of responses it generated on X. #BoycottIsrael. And now as for pro-Palestinian rallies to go up a few notches, we must continue to scream louder. Their movement raises questions. Where were these activists in the days after the October 7 Hamas terror attack that horrifically killed more than 1,200 women, children and men, and 200 people were kidnapped by Hamas terrorists? And now we're in a situation right here in Australia where anti-Semitism is on the rise, to the point many Jewish children no longer feel safe travelling to school, and security guards have had to be posted at Jewish schools around the country because of threats of violence and the rise in hate speech. The government and opposition criticised the protest and asked students not to attend, but the minor party, the Greens, were in full support for children walking out of the school gates and skipping class with no concern for the risk this protest carries in potentially further isolating Jewish children and creating a deeper divide in a country that we should all be proud to call home.
Watching the vision of the hundreds and hundreds of students who were there, it's very sad to see that these are the attitudes that are held by young Australians. And this comes as Bill Shorten's office was vandalised overnight for his support of Israel. And it follows pro-Palestinian protesters targeting Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister's office, also Chris Minns, the Premier in New South Wales. Their tactics are deplorable. And now they're grooming a new generation to hate Jews. These protests risk indoctrinating children to hate Israel in a similar fashion to how Hamas terrorists brainwash Palestinian youths to believe Jews are the enemy.
Independent MP Allegra Spender shared her concern, posting on X. School protests for Palestine risk isolating Jewish children who are already so frightened by rising anti-Semitism that many are choosing to hide their identity. I urge all students to give some thought to the impact their actions may have on the mental health of their classmates and look for ways to unify. We should all be doing all we can to maintain the social harmony that's at the heart of this great multicultural country. Sky's Andrew Bolt argues this was a hate protest against Israel.
Before I get to you, I just first want to show viewers scenes from the school strike for Palestine today, as James mentions, protests on the street, because this was different to what we were told to expect, just students, a student strike, just wanting an end to people dying in this war. First, well, yes, there were students there. There were a few hundred, including a fair few in Islamic clothing, and African students as well, which I rather think is a bit sad and ominous, but anyway. The crowd, though, was also padded out by a lot of adults, as some pushing other leftist causes, buy one, get one free. Quite a few, in fact, as well as university students from the Marxist Socialist Alliance and the equally Marxist Socialist Alternative, plus a mother who decided that she should share the mic with the kids.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
And the second point, Evelyn, is that this was really a hate protest against Israel, a protest that called for its destruction from the river to the sea.
The Australian state genocided Indigenous communities.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free!
Israel is on stolen land, and that's Palestine, not Israel. They should give back the stolen land. It's not theirs.
Genocided Indigenous communities. The Indigenous and Palestinian struggle goes hand in hand.
Evelyn, your reaction to all that?
I think it's nothing new seeing infiltrators taking over rallies. I mean, we've seen it from, time and time again. But when you hold a public protest, it's inevitably going to attract people who want to advance their own agenda. But it's also no surprise that children in particular jump on this because they're starved of purpose and meaning in life. Kids don't know why they exist. It's how it's designed. It's how they've been indoctrinated. And so when you feed them a steady diet of Marxism, they can't help but view every conflict as a struggle between the oppressed and the oppressors. Kids are ripe for exploitation. Lefties love jumping on these things. This is the fruit of Marxism. Marxists can't see the world any other way. They instantly side with whoever they are told is oppressed. And in this case, it's Palestine. Doesn't matter how evil the oppressed class is, by virtue of them being labelled oppressed, they are seen as the good guys and the oppressors as evil. And it unfortunately is whoever has the power.
And of course, Israel is capitalist, so that makes it even more an enemy of these two Marxist groups that were there recruiting, seeding hate and trying to profit off it. But what did you make of it, James, particularly that appeal at the end, and we see it quite often now? Well, this is the cause here of Aborigines is linked to that of the Palestinians. They're both Indigenous, therefore we support them both.
Yeah, well, key Aboriginal activist Marsha Langton came out a week or so ago and said there is no similarity between the case of the Palestinians and any grievances that Australian Indigenous people have. But I'd have a couple of questions about this protest, Andrew. Number one, if it were held on Saturday rather than Thursday, how many of those young people would have been there? Number two, why are so many adults at a kids' protest unless they are simply manipulating these young children? Number three, where are the parents of these kids? How are these kids not in school and why are their parents not enforcing that? And number four, how can this generation be so ignorant? They're calling for a ceasefire. Well, there's a ceasefire on the table. It's Hamas that haven't yet signed it and come to the party. They're yelling out Allahu Akbar.
Right.
This is an expression used by terrorists as they raped, murdered and kidnapped Jewish civilians. And on top of all of that, they're protesting as kids. Well, shouldn't they be protesting for the 30 children and babies who are now being held hostage in Gaza? I am so depressed watching these protests happen. If this is the state of our country, we are in big, big trouble, Andrew.
And Evelyn and James, as you would both know, if you want to make an analogy with Indigenous people over in that conflict, the Jews were in around the area of Jerusalem a lot longer than the Palestinians. So maybe they're the Indigenous people the left should be reaching out to. Evelyn Ray, James McPherson, thank you both so much for your time up.
Shadow Minister for Education Sarah Henderson has told Sky News this was all about activism and anti-Semitism.
Also, you've got to say, where are the parents in all of this? These kids can't vote. I suspect most couldn't even find Gaza on a map, yet they'll be used as pawns. They'll be a recruitment vehicle for the Greens in particular. What would you do if you were the minister?
Well, Peter, great to join you. And firstly, I want to congratulate Moran for this very important initiative, which comes off the back of Premier Jacinta Allen basically green lighting this protest by saying that students have a right to attend, a democratic right to attend this protest, when we know this is all about activism, this is all about indoctrination, and of course it's all about fueling anti-Semitism. And that's what's going to happen not just here in Melbourne, but there are other protests around the country. As a parent, I think most parents would be dismayed because classrooms are for education, not indoctrination. And frankly, the Premier has been completely irresponsible and reckless. And I've called on the Albanese government again today and the Education Minister, Jason Clare-Peter, to take a tougher stand to make it very clear that children need to be in school and they should not be used as political pawns.
Marana, it's one thing for adults, I think, to see vast numbers of people rallying on the weekend, as we've seen here and around the world. But I can't imagine what it must be like for Jewish kids to anticipate their own peers marching in the street against them. Yes, it's anti-Semitism, it's open Jew hate. That's got to be also front of mind for parents like you.
Look, that was the real driver of this letter. We're just worried about our kids. I mean, you know, what happens on Friday morning when they turn up to school and they look around and, you know, start hearing their peers talk about, you know, what they did at the rally and which signs they held. And, you know, it just really compromises their feelings of psychological and physical safety. And I think that right is much more important than the right to demonstrate or the right for free speech. But I think from our point of view, we feel like we're watching a car accident in slow motion. We know how this is going to end. We know that every one of these rallies, you know, creates a burst of anti-Semitic activity. And, you know, I think it puts a lot of pressure on schools and teachers to navigate this at school. I don't really know how they can, but, you know, we're definitely worried about how this will play out in the schoolyard. And our kids are already feeling unsafe. I mean, a lot of them, when they're on public transport, turn their jumpers inside out or, you know, change their uniform so that they're not identified as Jewish. So it's extremely difficult. I mean, you know, we know children are our most vulnerable members of the community, and it's just really saddens us to see that they have to go through this.
I mean, Sarah, honestly, you used to work at the ABC many years ago, but if people were abusing schoolgirls with hijabs on, it would be front of the newspapers, we'd all be talking about it through the national broadcaster. But somehow there is a level of silence, certainly not here on Sky News, but there's a level of silence because these are Jewish kids, and somehow it's been licensed that you could go after Jewish Australians on the back of this Israeli conflict. That's what concerns me. And again, the parents and the teachers, it's not as if Australian school standards are leading the world. They've had such a dramatic fall in recent times. We're protesting about climate change last week and now Palestine this week.
Peter, absolutely. I visited a wonderful Jewish school in Melbourne today, Mount Scopus Memorial College, and met with Year 11 students, and they spoke about their genuine fears and doing just that. Some of them are too afraid to show symbols of their faith in public. Some were very proud to wear their symbols of faith, but there is no doubt that this protest really poses a very serious risk to the safety and well-being of Jewish students, but more broadly sends the message that they don't matter in our community, and it is absolutely shocking. And as for the ABC and some of the coverage that we are seeing, as you say, if this was happening with any other sector of our community, there would be front page headlines everywhere. And it is not good enough, Peter. All students must be safe when they go to school, and parents expect them to go to school. And as you say, the school standards across Australia, with 1 in 3 students failing NAPLAN, students need every single day in school to get the best quality education, and it's absolutely appalling that this is happening. And Jacinta Allen and the Education Minister must direct schools and school principals not to allow any student to go to this protest. It must be a firm rule, and I can tell you, frankly, if this doesn't happen, if this all goes pear-shaped, which I'm sure it will, I think that the Premier's days in the top job are numbered. She, frankly, has absolutely let down all Victorians by her pathetic and irresponsible stand.
All right, we'll leave it there. Moran, thank you for your time. I want to assure you the vast majority of Australians are standing with you. I know it's particularly tough. Thank you, Sarah Henderson, as well.